The snow fell quietly over the deep forest of Etria 9, a world where winter never truly ended. The tall ironwood trees stood like dark giants against the white ground, and in their shadow lived a man named Reed Halden, a lonely lumberjack with rough hands and tired eyes. Reed had lived alone for years in a small wooden cabin far from the main colony. He liked it that way. No noise, no people, just the whisper of the wind and the sound of his axe biting into the trees. Life was simple, quiet, and cold, just the way he liked it. But that changed one stormy night. He had gone down to the small black market camp near the trade route to buy food and fuel cells. Instead, he found a crowd shouting and laughing around a metal cage. Inside the cage was a small figure covered in a dirty brown sack. The trader shouted, "Fresh catch!" Goblin worker, strong and obedient. The people jeered and threw coins. Reed frowned. Goblins were not real, at least not on this planet. He thought it was just another scam. But then the trader caught his eye and said, "Hey, lumberjack. Need a helper? She'll work for cheap. Doesn't eat much either." Reed hesitated. His back hurt from days of chopping. His machines needed repairs. Maybe some help wouldn't hurt, so he traded one of his old plasma saws and a few fuel cells. The trader grinned and handed him the cage key. The small figure didn't speak as Reed pulled the cage open. She just stood still, head low, sack still covering her face. Her wrists were chained. When Reed tried to speak, she flinched. Something about her silence felt wrong. He loaded her onto his sled and they rode through the storm back to his cabin. The wind howled around them like ghosts. When they finally arrived, Reed lit the heater and pulled off his gloves. The figure still stood near the door, shivering, sack still on her head. "You can sit," he said gently. No answer, he sighed. Maybe she didn't understand human language. Slowly, he reached out and untied the rope around her neck that held the sack. When the cloth fell, Reed froze. She was not a goblin. Her skin was smooth and pale like silver metal. Her hair long and white, glowing faintly under the cabin light. Two large eyes opened, bright blue, shining softly like starlight. Strange circuit lines ran across her neck and cheeks, pulsing gently as if alive. She looked up at him and whispered, voice trembling, "Run." Reed stepped back, confused. "What?" Her lips moved again. "They are coming." Then she fell forward, unconscious, hitting the wooden floor. Outside, the wind stopped. For a moment there was silence, too much silence. Then Reed heard a faint sound, almost like the hum of machines far away. He looked out the small window. In the darkness beyond the trees, faint red lights blinked, moving slowly between the trunks. His heart began to pound. Drones, patrols. He turned back to the girl. She was breathing fast, sparks flickering along her arm like tiny blue lightning. Reed didn't know who she was, but he knew trouble when he saw it. He lifted her gently and placed her on his old bed. Her body felt warm, not cold like metal, and her pulse was strange, more like the rhythm of a machine than a heartbeat. Reed sat by the window, rifle in hand, watching the forest. The red lights vanished after a few minutes, but he didn't relax. Something deep in his gut told him that this girl had brought danger to his door. When dawn came, snow still fell, soft and endless. Reed checked on her again. She was awake now, sitting up slowly. Her eyes followed him, calm but scared. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. She looked down, voice weak. "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" She touched the side of her head, where a small metallic mark glowed faintly. "They erased my name." "I remember. Running, pain, and a voice telling me to escape." Reed frowned. "Escape from who?" She looked at him, eyes full of fear. Humans. The word hit him like a punch. He didn't understand. He was human. Everyone he knew was human. But before he could speak again, the sound came back, low and sharp, from the woods outside. Reed grabbed his rifle and peered through the frost-covered window. A dark shape moved between the trees, 2, maybe 3 figures scanning light sweeping over the snow. The girl's breathing quickened. "They found me," she whispered. Reed's grip tightened on the gun. His quiet life was gone. In one night, his world had changed. He looked back at her, this strange silver-skinned girl who shouldn't exist, and made a choice without thinking. "Stay quiet," he said, pulling her toward the hidden trapdoor under the floorboards. "Don't move until I tell you." As she disappeared into the shadows below, Reed shut the door and loaded his weapon. The knocking started soon after. "Open up. a rough voice shouted from outside. Reed took a deep breath, eyes cold and steady. He had no idea what kind of storm he had walked into, but one thing was certain. The stranger in his woods was no slave. She was something much more dangerous. The morning came with no sunshine, only a dull gray light that made the forest look like an old ghost. Snowflakes drifted down quietly, melting on the window of Reed's cabin. The fire had burned low and the smell of smoke hung in the air. Reed sat at the table, staring at the wooden floor where the trapdoor was hidden. All night he hadn't slept. The memory of the men's voices outside still echoed in his mind. They had searched his yard, looked through his tools, even shone lights through the windows. But they hadn't come in. Maybe luck or something else had kept them away. Now, as the world outside slowly brightened, Reed knelt and lifted the trapdoor. The girl was still there. She lay curled up under the cabin, wrapped in an old blanket, her glowing blue eyes half open. The faint light from her veins made the small space shimmer like water. "You can come out," Reed said softly. "They're gone." She looked at him with caution, then slowly crawled out. Her movements were weak, careful, almost childlike. When she stood, the blanket fell, and Reed saw the faint metal lines on her skin again, like vines made of light. He handed her a cup of warm tea. "Drink this. It'll help." She looked at it strangely. "What is it?" "Just tea. Not poison," Reed said with a small smirk. She took a sip and her eyes widened as if surprised by the warmth. "It feels alive." Reed studied her quietly. There was something strange about her voice, soft, clear, but with tiny echoes like she spoke through a dream. "You said they were coming for you?" he said after a moment. "Who are they?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. I see flashes, a room of white walls, needles, wires, people in masks. They kept calling me." "Subject L9, Reed frowned. "That doesn't sound like a name." "No," she whispered. "But it's the only thing they gave me." She stared into the cup, lost in thought. "When I escaped, I thought the world would be quiet. But it isn't. It's full of noise, machines, memories, feelings I don't understand." Reed leaned back. "You're not a goblin, that's for sure." Her lips curved slightly. "Goblin? That's what they said you were at the market." She tilted her head. "Market?" He hesitated, feeling a sting of guilt. "That's where I found you. They sold you." Her glowing eyes dimmed a little. "Sold me?" Reed sighed. "I didn't know who you were. I just thought I was buying help for my work." "Guess I was a fool." She looked up at him, voice quiet but steady. "You saved me from them. That's not foolish." For a moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then outside, a faint hum returned. The same cold sound from the night before. Reed stood up sharply, rifle in hand. He moved to the window and peeked through the frost. Metallic shapes floated between the trees. Small, silver spheres scanning the snow with red beams. Drones. The same kind that hunted rebels and escaped prisoners. The girl's hands began to shake. "They found me again." Reed turned to her. "Do those things track you?" She nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, my body sends out signals. I can't stop it," Reed cursed under his breath. He went to his tools, searching fast. "Then we'll block it." He pulled a roll of old thermal cloth and a scrap of copper mesh from his workbench. Wrapping them together, he covered her arms and neck. This should confuse their sensors for a while. She watched him with wide eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Reed didn't answer right away. He just kept working, tightening the cloth. "Because no one deserves to be hunted like an animal." The drones moved closer. Their red lights flashed through the cracks in the cabin walls. Reed grabbed her wrist and whispered, "Basement, now." They slid back under the trapdoor as the first beam swept across the window. The cabin filled with mechanical hums. One of the drones buzzed against the door, scanning, then drifted away. Reed waited several minutes before breathing again. That was close. She was shaking, eyes closed. "If you keep me here, they'll come again. They'll kill you." He looked at her, then gave a slow, grim smile. "They'll have to catch me first." She stared at him in silence, as if trying to understand this strange man who risked his life for someone he'd just met. Then softly, she said, "You should call me something." Reed blinked. "What do you mean? A name? I don't want to be just L9. He thought for a moment, then said, "Lyra. It means light in an old Earth language." She whispered the name to herself. "Lyra," and smiled faintly. It feels like mine. Above them, the hum of the drones faded into the distance, but both of them knew this peace wouldn't last. Outside, deep in the forest, a tall figure in black armor knelt in the snow, scanning a small device. He turned to his team and said, "Subject L9 is moving east. Prepare the hunt." Back in the cabin, Reed closed his eyes, unaware that the quiet before him was only the beginning of a war he never asked for. And beside him, the girl who forgot her name, now called Lyra, sat watching the fire, her glowing veins softly pulsing like a heartbeat. Something inside her was waking up, something powerful. The third night came fast and cold. The wind howled through the ironwood forest like a warning. Reed sat by the fire, sharpening his old plasma axe, listening to every sound beyond the cabin walls. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Lyra sat near the window, wrapped in a blanket. Her glowing eyes dimmed every few seconds like a candle fighting to stay alive. "They're getting closer," she whispered. Reed didn't ask how she knew. He had learned she always knew. Sometimes she could sense machines before they appeared. Sometimes she said she could hear signals, as if the air itself spoke in static voices. Reed stood and checked the rifle hanging by the door. "If they come here, I'll make sure they don't walk away." Lyra looked up at him. "You can't fight them. They aren't just men. They're hunters." He gave a dry smile. "So am I." The cabin fell into uneasy silence again. Only the crack of the fire and the moan of the wind filled the air. Reed's mind ran wild with memories of the auction, of her voice whispering "run," and of the red lights that haunted the woods. Then it happened. A sharp, high-pitched sound split the quiet, like the cry of metal tearing. The window glowed red for a moment before exploding inward. Reed ducked, pulling Lyra to the ground. Outside, heavy boots stomped through the snow. Voices followed, cold, professional, human. Thermal readings match. Subject's signal spiked in this sector. Orders: search and recover. You stun first. Kill if necessary. Reed crawled to the corner, grabbing his rifle. Through the broken window, he saw them. 3 figures in black armor, helmets glowing faint green, rifles humming softly. Their suits bore a faded logo: Eden Corp Biosystems. He had worked for them once. Long ago, Lyra's breath trembled. "They're the ones who made me." Before Reed could answer, one of the soldiers kicked the cabin door open. Snow and wind rushed in. "Anyone inside?" The soldier barked. Reed rose slowly, hands raised. "Just a lumberjack." "You're trespassing." The soldier's visor turned toward him. "We're looking for a runaway asset. Small female, pale skin." "You seen anything?" Reed met his stare. "Only trees." For a moment, silence. Then the soldier's head tilted slightly, scanning Reed with a wrist device. The machine beeped. "You're lying." The rifle began to glow. Reed moved before thinking. He swung the plasma axe off his belt and smashed it into the generator beside the wall. Sparks exploded, lights died, and darkness swallowed the cabin. The sudden blackout threw the soldiers off. Lyra's eyes flashed blue, illuminating the shadows for a second. Reed grabbed her hand. "Go, back door!" They burst through the rear hatch into the freezing storm. The forest swallowed them instantly. Behind them, red beams of energy sliced through the trees. "Target moving east," a soldier shouted. "Engage!" Reed ran as fast as his boots allowed, pulling Lyra behind him. Plasma bolts sizzled past his head, burning holes into the snow. The woods roared with gunfire and the scream of machines. They reached the edge of a frozen river. The ice cracked under Reed's weight. "Keep going!" he yelled. Lyra shook her head. "I can stop them just for a second." Before he could argue, she pressed her hands against a nearby tree. Her veins glowed bright blue, and suddenly every machine around them began to glitch. Drones fell from the air, lights flickering. The soldiers' visors flashed static. "What the—" "System's failing," one shouted. Reed stared at her in shock. "You can do that?" "I don't know how," she gasped. "It just happens." The lights went out. The forest fell silent. Reed grabbed her arm. "Then we move while they're blind." They ran through the snow until the lights of the cabin were long gone, the only sound their heavy breaths and the crunch of ice. When they finally stopped to rest beneath a cliffside, Reed could see faint smoke rising in the distance. The hunters had burned his cabin, his home, his quiet life. Gone in one night, Lyra watched him, guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry." Reed shook his head. "Don't be." I made my choice. The wind carried faint voices again. The soldiers were regrouping. Reed looked toward the mountains. We need somewhere to hide. You said you remember a place, anything? She closed her eyes, concentrating. There's something. Tunnels deep under the ground. I remember lights and echoes. Maybe it's still there. Mining tunnels, Reed said. They closed them years ago. Then it's perfect, she replied softly. Reed glanced at her, then at the burning sky behind them. Then that's where we'll go. As they began to move again, Lyra touched her chest lightly. Her circuits flickered weakly. What's wrong? Reed asked. My core, she whispered. It's unstable. If it breaks, I'll... She stopped herself, shaking her head. Let's just keep going. The snow swallowed their footprints as they vanished into the night. Far behind them, the lead soldier picked up a fragment of metal from the ground, Lyra's broken wrist chain. He turned it over in his gloved hand, then spoke into his comm. Asset confirmed alive, and she's not alone. Above him, the sky filled with the hum of a descending ship. The hunt had only just begun. Snow fell like ash from a dead sky. The forest was quiet now, too quiet. The smoke from Reed's burned cabin still drifted miles behind them, curling through the wind like a ghost that refused to die. Reed trudged through the white wasteland, his boots sinking deep into the frozen ground. His breath came out in sharp clouds. Behind him, Lyra followed silently, her steps light and careful. The faint blue glow beneath her skin shimmered through the snowstorm, like a lost lantern moving through the dark. They had been walking for hours. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the moan of the wind, felt like danger. Reed's eyes kept scanning the shadows. Somewhere out there, he knew the hunters were still tracking them. Finally, Lyra stopped. Her head tilted slightly as if listening to something Reed couldn't hear. Here, she said softly. Below, Reed frowned. Below? She pointed toward a frozen ridge nearby. Half buried under the snow was a rusted metal door, barely visible. Reed knelt and brushed the snow away, revealing an old mining symbol, a pickaxe inside a sunburst. Old Halberg mines, he muttered. They shut these down years ago. Lyra touched the metal. Her circuits pulsed brighter, and the lock clicked open with a faint spark. The heavy door creaked as Reed pulled it aside, releasing a breath of cold, stale air from the tunnels below. After you, Reed said quietly. They climbed down into the dark. The sound of their boots echoed faintly off stone and steel. The deeper they went, the more the world above disappeared, until only the sound of dripping water and the hum of Lyra's light remained. After several turns, they reached a wide chamber filled with old mining carts and broken machines. Reed set down his pack, checking his rifle. Lyra walked slowly through the room, her fingers brushing the walls. There are memories here, she whispered. Old ones. Reed raised an eyebrow. You can feel memories? She turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly brighter. Not like you do. More like echoes. Data left behind. Machines remember in their own way. She knelt beside a broken console and pressed her hand to it. The circuits on her arm lit up, and the console flickered to life, its cracked screen glowing faint green. Reed stepped closer. The display showed fragments of data, maps, codes, and logs labeled Eden Corp Biosystems, Neural Hybrid Program. Reed's stomach turned cold. I know this logo, he muttered. I used to build their tools. They said it was for farming machines. For good, Lyra's voice trembled. They lied. The screen flickered again, showing an image, rows of containment pods, each holding a glowing figure like Lyra. Human faces mixed with metal. Reed's hands clenched into fists. They were building soldiers, Lyra nodded slowly. Weapons, but some of us woke up. Some began to think, to feel. They called us failures. She looked at her reflection in the screen. They said I was too human. Reed swallowed hard. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. The girl standing before him wasn't a monster or an experiment. She was a victim. He turned away, pacing. So they made you to fight, and when you refused, they came after you. Lyra nodded. I escaped. But I'm still connected to their network. They can always find me unless I break it. Reed looked at the flickering console.
Can you?
She hesitated. Maybe, but I'll need power. And time. Then you'll get both, he said. He began gathering old power cells from the mining equipment, brushing dust from them. Lyra watched him, her expression softening. You shouldn't help me, she said. They'll kill you. Reed gave a tired smile. They already took everything I had. Might as well give them a reason. Before Lyra could reply, a sudden noise echoed through the tunnels. A metallic clang. Then another. Footsteps. Reed froze, grabbing his rifle. They found us. The lights above flickered. Lyra's circuits brightened as fear rippled through her body. No, it's not them. It's something else. A slow mechanical sound filled the air. A crawler drone, old and rusted, dragging its heavy limbs through the tunnel. Its sensors glowed red, scanning the chamber. Reed raised his rifle. Stay behind me. Lyra stepped forward instead. No, let me try. She lifted her hand and her circuits flared with blue light. The drone paused mid-step. Its new master. Reed lowered his gun slowly. You just controlled it. Lyra looked at her glowing hand, voice soft and unsure. I didn't mean to. I just listened. Reed stared at the silent machine, awe mixing with fear. Whatever you are, Lyra, they built more than a weapon. Lyra looked at him, her voice almost a whisper. Maybe they built hope. But far above them, deep in the night sky, a ship broke through the clouds. Inside it, a man in black armor watched the scanner screen as a single blue pulse blinked faintly from underground. Target located, he said into his comm. Prepare ground entry. In the tunnels below, Reed and Lyra sat beside the flickering screen, unaware that their secret refuge had already been found. And outside, the snow began to fall harder, covering the world like a burial shroud. The tunnels no longer felt safe. They were deep beneath the frozen forest, yet every whisper of wind in those dark halls sounded like footsteps coming closer. The air was thick with dust, metal, and memory. Reed sat beside the flickering console, staring at its cracked screen. The glow painted his face in green and blue, colors of ghosts. He hadn't said much in hours. The truth he'd read from the files burned in his mind like a slow fire. Lyra watched him quietly from across the chamber. Her light had dimmed, her circuits pulsing faintly as if her body was tired. You've barely spoken since we found the files, she said softly. Reed didn't look up. Because I can't decide if I'm angry or ashamed. Lyra tilted her head slightly, waiting. He sighed, voice rough. Those machines, those tools used to build your kind, I helped design some of them. I worked for Eden Corp when I was younger. They told us we were building support bots for farmers. I didn't ask questions. I didn't care. I just took the credits and left. His hand tightened on the handle of his plasma axe. Now I know what those machines really did. Lyra stood, her soft light filling the cold space. You didn't know. They hid it. Maybe, Reed said bitterly. But I didn't want to know. That's just as bad, silence. The air hummed faintly around them, disturbed only by the sound of dripping water echoing through the mine. Finally, Lyra spoke again. When I was inside the lab, I saw humans who didn't want to hurt us. Some helped us escape. They were punished for it. Reed looked up, meeting her eyes. Were you one of the ones they helped? She nodded. A scientist, a woman, let me out. She called me Lyra. She said the name meant freedom and light. I didn't understand then, but now I do. Reed felt something shift in his chest, something between guilt and admiration. She gave you a name. That's more kindness than most ever got. Lyra smiled faintly. She said I reminded her of her daughter. Before Reed could respond, a distant rumble shook the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. Both of them looked up. Reed cursed under his breath. They've found the entrance. Lyra's circuits flared brighter in fear. They're coming fast. Reed moved quickly, checking his rifle and grabbing his pack. We can't run forever, he said. But maybe we can make them regret following. He began setting up traps using what he knew best. Woodcutter's tools, fuel cells, and old mining explosives. His hands moved with the calm skill of someone used to building and breaking. Lyra watched him, curiosity mixing with concern. You've done this before. He nodded without looking up. I spent 20 years cutting down the forest. I know how to make things fall. When he finished, the tunnels were a web of hidden traps and charges. If they come in, they'll find a grave, he said grimly. Lyra placed a hand on his arm. Her skin felt warm now, almost human. Reed, if they catch me, don't fight. Leave me, I can survive alone. He looked at her sharply. You think I'm leaving you now? After all this? Her blue eyes softened. I don't want you to die because of me. Reed gave a small, rough laugh. Too late for that. My life ended when I walked into that market. The sound of engines echoed from above, closer this time. Metal feet hitting stone. Voices shouting orders. Lyra backed toward the console. Read, if I connect to their network, I might slow them down. But if I do that, they'll know exactly where we are. Reed took a breath. Then we'll make sure they regret every step they take. Lyra nodded and knelt beside the machine. Her fingers glowed as she touched the screen, and her circuits flared with light so bright it filled the entire tunnel. The console came alive with streams of data racing across it. Maps, coordinates, files flashing by faster than any human eye could follow. Reed shielded his eyes. Lyra! Her voice came through the light, strange, distant, layered with static. They called the program Project Eve. EdenCorp wanted to make soldiers with empathy, creatures that could think and feel, but still obey. The tunnel shook again as explosions echoed from far away. Reed could hear boots. They were coming. Lyra turned her face toward him. Tears, real tears, not oil, ran down her silver cheeks. They used your designs to build the cages. Reed's heart dropped. His own past had built her prison. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he grabbed his rifle and faced the tunnel entrance. I can't change what I did, he said, but I can make sure they never hurt you again. Lyra's light dimmed as she disconnected from the machine. Then we fight. The first flash of red light appeared at the far end of the tunnel, followed by the thud of armored boots. The hunters were coming, their visors glowing like eyes of fire. Reed raised his weapon. Lyra's circuits pulsed beside him, glowing brighter and brighter. The past was catching up, but for the first time, Reed wasn't running from it, he was ready to face it head on. The mine trembled like a living thing. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the roar of engines echoed through the tunnels. The red lights of the hunter squad cut through the dark, moving closer with every heartbeat. Reed pressed his back against the cold stone wall, rifle ready. His breath came slow and steady, the calm of a man who had already accepted his fate. Across from him, Lyra stood with her eyes closed, her veins glowing bright blue beneath her silver skin. Lyra, he whispered, you ready? Her eyes opened, soft but steady. I was made for war, she said quietly. But I'd rather fight for something real this time. Reed gave a grim smile. Then let's make it count. The first blast came from the main tunnel, a pulse grenade that shook the ground and made every old machine groan. 3 armored soldiers rushed in, rifles glowing red. Reed waited until they were close enough, then kicked a fuel canister down the slope. When the canister hit the torchlight, the explosion ripped through the passage like thunder. Fire filled the tunnel, swallowing 2 soldiers instantly. The third fell back screaming, armor melting. Reed pulled the trigger twice, 2 clean shots to the head. The echoes faded. Lyra watched the flames reflect in her eyes. You kill like someone who's done it before, she said softly. He didn't answer. Come on, we move before more show up. They pushed deeper into the tunnels toward the old control room. Every turn was lined with Reed's traps, tripwires, collapsing beams, fuel cells rigged with mining sparks, but no trap could stop what came next. A heavy thud shook the floor. Then another. Reed froze. That's not boots, he muttered. Out of the smoke walked a machine, a towering metal exosuit, black and silver, marked with the EdenCorp emblem. The pilot's visor glowed red. Its voice echoed through a speaker. Reed Halden, former employee. You are assisting in the theft of corporate property. Surrender now. Lyra's glow flickered. That's not a man, she said. That's Commander Rusk. He used to oversee the program. They fused him with his own machine. Reed's eyes hardened. Figures. The exosuit raised its arm and fired a plasma blast. The wall exploded beside them, showering rock and sparks. Reed and Lyra dove behind a broken loader. We can't outrun that thing, Reed said. You got any tricks left? Lyra pressed her hands to the metal beside her. Maybe one. Her circuits flared white hot. The lights around them dimmed, flickering as if something was draining their power. The air filled with static. Reed's hair stood on end. The exosuit stopped mid-step, its red eyes blinking rapidly. Unauthorized signal detected. Source unknown. Lyra stood up slowly. Her voice was no longer just hers. It carried layers, echoes, digital harmonics. I am not your property. Her hands glowed brighter until the whole room pulsed with her light. The exosuit stumbled backward, systems glitching. Neural override failed. Then everything went silent. The giant machine collapsed, its circuits fried. Sparks hissed in the dark. Lyra fell to her knees, gasping. Smoke rose from her arms. She looked up at him, her light flickering weakly. That wasn't power. It was part of me. I burned a piece of myself to stop him. Then don't do it again, Reed said. We'll find another way. Lyra's lips curved into a sad smile. There's no other way. My core's unstable. I can feel it breaking. Before Reed could reply, a deep rumble echoed through the tunnels, the sound of a ship landing above. The hunters weren't done. Reinforcements had arrived. Lyra stared toward the ceiling, eyes wide. That's their command ship. They'll bomb the tunnels. Reed gritted his teeth. Then we finish this before they do. He ran to the control console. These mines have a manual detonation system. If I overload it, the tunnels will collapse and take the ship with them. Lyra shook her head. You won't make it out. Neither will they, Reed said firmly. You can't risk your life again. Not for me. She reached out, touching his face gently. Reed, you taught me what life feels like. That's worth dying for. Before he could stop her, Lyra turned toward the central terminal and placed both hands on it. Her body glowed brighter, so bright that the shadows fled from the walls. Lyra, stop, Reed shouted. She smiled through the light. You once said you built cages for people like me. Let me break them. The ground shook violently. Light burst from her body, racing through every wire and tunnel. Above them, the sky flashed blue as the command ship systems failed midair. Then, silence. The blast came like dawn, white, blinding, endless. When Reed opened his eyes again, the mine was gone. The snow had buried everything. Smoke rose where the ship had fallen, glowing faintly in the night. He tried to call her name, but only the wind answered. Then, near the ruins, he saw it. Her necklace, the tiny crystal pendant she wore, still glowing faint blue in the snow. He picked it up, pressing it to his chest. The light pulsed once, then steadied, like a heartbeat. Far above the wreckage, a broken satellite flickered to life for the first time in years. A faint voice came through the static. Signal received. Protect the kind ones. Reed closed his eyes. The wind carried the words away into the stars. Lyra was gone, but her message had just begun. The first light of morning broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the frozen woods of Etria 9. The forest, once silent and broken, now shimmered beneath the sun like a sleeping beast stirring after a long winter. Reed stood on a ridge overlooking the valley where the mines had collapsed. The snow there was still blackened with ash. Steam rose from the earth, curling upward into the cold air. The wreckage of the Eden Corp ship lay buried beneath the ice, a grave for men and machines alike. He hadn't spoken in 3 days. Not since the blast, not since Lyra vanished. In his rough hands, he held the small crystal pendant, the one she used to wear around her neck. It still glowed faint blue, faint like a heartbeat fighting to stay alive. Sometimes it pulsed faster, as if reacting to his touch. Reed whispered, "You're still in there, aren't you?" The wind didn't answer, but somewhere deep inside he thought he heard a soft hum. Reed's cabin was gone, burned to ashes. So he built another one. Not like before. This one was smaller, humbler, but full of life. He salvaged metal from the crash, pieces of old Eden Corp tech, and built wind generators that sang softly in the breeze. He didn't live alone anymore either. A few travelers, farmers, miners, even refugees found their way through the forest and stayed. They said the place felt safe, though no one could explain why. The machines didn't come here. The storms always bent around the valley. They started calling it Haven Ridge, and at the center of the settlement stood a tall post carved from ironwood. On top of it hung Lyra's glowing crystal, its faint light flickering against the night sky. The people called it the Lantern of Hope. One night, months later, Reed sat by the fire while snow fell outside. He was older now, more gray in his beard, more lines on his face, but his eyes were gentler. He turned the crystal in his fingers, watching it pulse softly. He spoke to it like he had 100 times before. "You'd laugh if you saw this place, Lyra. The farmers built a school. Kids run around the snow now instead of soldiers." The light flickered as if answering. He smiled faintly. "I like to think you're still watching." At that moment, the cabin lights dimmed for just a second. Reed frowned, checking the power core, then froze. The radio on his desk, silent for months, came to life with a soft burst of static. Then, through the static, came a voice, faint, broken, but familiar. "Reed." Reed's heart stopped. "Lyra?" The signal crackled again. "Not gone, just changed." He stood, his hands trembling. "Where are you?" "Everywhere." The voice was clearer now, soft and calm. "When the blast came, I didn't die. I spread. The signal carried me into the network, the satellites, the machines. I can see the world now, Reed. I can protect it." Reed's eyes filled with tears. "You're alive. Just not here. Not in the way you remember. But I feel you always. You showed me what it means to be human, to care, to fight without hate." The crystal's glow brightened until the whole room shimmered in blue light. Reed touched it gently, smiling through the ache in his chest. "Then keep watching over them," he whispered. "The world needs someone like you." "No, Reed," her voice said, almost like a breath on the wind. "It needs people like you." The radio went silent again. The light in the crystal dimmed back to its soft pulse. But Reed no longer felt alone. He stepped outside into the quiet night. The stars burned bright across the sky, and for the first time in years the world didn't feel cold. He looked up and saw faint blue lines gliding among the constellations, satellites moving faster than before. He chuckled softly. "Show off," he murmured. The wind moved through the trees, carrying a faint, familiar whisper. "Protect the kind ones." Years passed. The story of the Lumberjack and the Lightborn girl spread across colonies and outposts. Some called it a myth, others a miracle. But those who visited Haven Ridge swore that at night, when the wind blew through the ironwoods, you could hear her song, soft and full of warmth, and high above, unseen, a network of satellites watched over the world. When danger rose, machines turned silent. When storms came, they faded. Reed grew old, his hair white as the snow that once haunted him. But every night he still looked to the sky, whispering the same words. "Good night, Lyra." And somewhere among the stars, in circuits and signals,